I had one notoriously important company, and that's where we focused. And I failed. I had not done the work. I don't know what I was thinking in retrospect, but I had to sit in that room and get questions from my peers on work that I didn't do. And in front of a new sales leader who was just forming his opinions about everybody on the team, which is not a good place to be.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to Tales from the Field. I'm Amy Volas, and today I have the very talented and wise Nathaniel Dean. I am thrilled to have you here.
It's exciting to be here. I am thrilled to have the opportunity. And to give a little background on me, I've spent about 10 years in enterprise sales with a focus on early and growth stage companies. So I have been the first or second sales hire at an emerging company now 3 times in my career. I've also started 2 companies. The first one was before my sales career started, and then the second one was a hiatus in the middle. So I can approach this from a sales point of view or a more general company building point of view.
This is what I love about you, Nathaniel. You are a very interesting fellow. And if we were to hop into the Nathaniel Dean time machine, where you thought you were cooking with gas, as they say, and in fact you were not, what is that?
So I'll get right to my failure, and then we can talk about how things might have gone differently. I was at a company, I'd been there about 2 years. I was an early sales hire there, and I felt like I had contributed an extraordinary amount to the team. I was doing well on quota. I was, administered Salesforce from the beginning. I had designed a number of their processes, and we had just gotten a little more mature, and we'd gotten a new VP of sales, and he wanted to do a deal review with everybody at the company. And in particular, his focus was deal mapping, knowing exactly who the buyers are at your target company. I had been at the company a couple years. There was an enterprise team that was a little more senior than I was at the time. And all those folks went first. I kind of thought that they weren't going to get into that much detail with me. So I went into this meeting way too sure of myself and was unprepared for particularly that deal mapping section that this new leader was particularly passionate about.
I have 2 questions just to give us some extra flavor here. This deal mapping exercise, is it solo in a one-on-one, or is this in front of your entire team?
In front of at least a wide swath of the go-to-market team. So including customer success and account management and onboarding, those sorts of folks.
And did this person have a certain methodology for this? Were they channeling their inner Miller Hyman with blue and green sheets? Was it something else? Or it was, I want you to map out a deal, regardless of whatever the methodology was?
Really the latter. We were building this out in, I think it was Microsoft Visio at the time. Literally who makes the decisions, who we're interacting with at each and every company that we were talking to. So closed deals and prospects. And candidly, I don't think I'd ever met a sales leader that had gone into that level of detail with that many customers.
And did this deal review, was it one deal in particular, or he wanted you to go through your entire pipeline and talk about this?
Really the entire pipeline, as he was just getting into the company and wanted a complete overview of what was going on.
Were you in SMB? Were you in mid-market? Was it enterprise then at that stage in your career? And how many accounts are we talking about? Because I'm just thinking about this from an overall story perspective, where it's like you've got a sales leader coming in, doing this with everybody on the team together in front of each other, and you're going through everyone's pipeline. I'm curious about what your patch or territory looked like to have to go through this out loud, let alone then at scale across the org.
There was a focus on the larger logos first.
Okay.
I was mid-market at the time, and the mid-market role at this company was sort of there was an organizational focus on enterprise, and that was a good learning experience for me. And so the mid-market role ended up being a little bit of everything but enterprise. And in particular, if I'm remembering this meeting correctly, I had one logo that was on the website, one notoriously important company, and that's where we focused. And I failed, right? I had not done the work. I don't know what I was thinking in retrospect, but maybe it was that we weren't going to get that far in the meeting. Maybe it was that we weren't ever going to get into that level of detail. But I had to sit in that room and get questions from my peers on work that I didn't do. And in front of a new sales leader who was just forming his opinions about everybody on the team, which is not a good place to be.
I can only imagine you sitting there, Nathaniel, and this is happening, and you have that realization of, uh-oh. When did that realization come up? Was it in the first minute? Was it in the first 5 minutes? Where did you realize I did not do the work, I am not prepared, and I look like a jerk?
Probably about halfway through the meeting. And as is this gentleman's purview, he was incredibly detail oriented and, continued to ask me every question about each of these customers. And while I could answer most of them, I hadn't documented it as he specifically asked me to. And I had to do that in front of my peers.
How did your peers respond to you, and how did he respond to you in the moment?
The leader was, again, if I'm remembering correctly, this is probably 10 years ago now, was a little dismissive, right? And as well he should have been. I probably came off as a cocky little kid in his office, right? And my peers at the company that I had worked with for a long time were trying to dissuade me that it would be okay, it would be fine. And you have to roll with the punches of these new leaders coming in. You should be learning from these new folks, and the organization gets better.
You said that you realized it halfway through, but did you really realize what we're talking about? And
no.
The understanding that you're also being evaluated.
Yeah, no, not at all. And, they don't teach this anywhere, but I think early in my career, I just lacked a little awareness, but I think I've gained that over time. And I didn't realize what was happening at the time.
We've all been here. I've been here. These aren't things that are taught or talked about very often. And so I really appreciate you opening up Pandora's box a bit, because it's not just necessarily, I see people do this later on in their careers as well. It's not that it's just somebody starting out. It could be somebody that is an early stage person and this is what they've done, and they don't work for a leader like that, or they don't have the awareness to think outside of themselves to know that they are being evaluated. You didn't realize it in the moment. When did you realize it?
My direct manager took me aside afterwards and explained the seriousness and coached me in what to say in that situation. I had closed a deal the day prior. His advice was to say, hey, I was busy closing X and I'll get to this. But it was afterwards with his pull aside that I think I realized the seriousness.
And so what happened after that?
I don't think I ever ingratiated myself to the new VP well. I think that I never recovered from that first impression.
That you never recovered for yourself because you couldn't get over it, or that you never recovered in his eyes because you'd already screwed up and his mind was made up?
The latter, though, if I was more mature in my career, if I had known what was going on, I probably would have set up a meeting with him to discuss that one-on-one and address that head on and try to change his opinion, right? I just let it simmer. And that's probably the wrong thing to do too.
For anybody listening, this is where accountability and ownership are your friend, because truly, unless it's the biggest of dirt bags that has never made a mistake themselves, they will be very open to you coming their way and saying, there needs to be some recovery here. And how about you book a meeting with that leader and talk about what you will do, what you did learn, and how you feel about it, that you're embarrassed, that you know you can do better, that you let yourself down. Anybody that comes that way, that then persecutes you for that or makes up their mind and you're willing to do the work, that's probably not a great leader. So did you ever do that in those next 8 to, let's call it 12 months after that?
No. And of course, that was another mistake on my behalf as well. Again, nobody teaches this stuff.
No. This is why we're talking about it out loud. This is why I love you. You're willing to talk about this.
This is why, conversations like this are so valuable. And people with good mentorship go so much farther than people without, right? Because this is an easy misstep, right? Setting up a meeting, it's a half an hour, get it done, right? but I didn't know to do that.
When did you learn this in earnest? Was it after you left? Was it during your time there?
I think it was an iterative process that correlated with me growing more emotionally mature, right? I don't think there was a single point.
And why did it become important to you, you think?
In sales, you have to take a level of accountability over your, let's say your deals, right? That people don't often see the whole part of, right? Of course, you're managing a complex deal with interactions with the customer, but you're also managing the interaction with customer success, with marketing. If your customer needs a new product built, it's on you to work with the product team to make sure that gets done. And you'll see the best reps build really deep relationships within the company to make sure that gets done. I think it's really learning that, because if you don't nail those internal relationships and really understand how those work, you're not going to be as successful as you can. And those internal relationships roll right back to managing one's own career.
When you think back to what you would do differently that has served you well today, that's read, rinse, and repeat all the time, nonstop, no matter what. And you've led people, you've started companies. If it's part of your playbook, what do you do now to avoid that really hard moment to think back and talk out loud about?
There's two things, I think, which one is over-communicate on all fronts, right? So I guess that's more relevant to the aftermath than the pre-work. But then the first thing is understand exactly what your management, your leader values, and produce that. Right? It's just like understanding exactly what your customer values and producing that. It is the same as managing a deal. The point where I failed is I failed to do that work.
Are there, I mean, it could be one, it could be two, it could be three takeaways that no matter what, this is what you hope people get from this to be helpful to them?
You will have new leadership at some point if your company's doing well, right? Learn how to work with those new leaders well. Learn what they value and grow with them. That cannot be a relationship with friction.
Are you going to drop your mic after that one? I mean, that's a good one. Do you have any other tricks up your sleeve, or we're just leaving everybody wanting more with that one?
What else? I struggled, I still do to some extent with over communicating, right? And this is antithetical to enterprise sales where you have to communicate. But, early in my career, I thought I was bothering people by keeping them informed, right? And that leads to a lot of nonsense that nobody wants to deal with. The key thing on each of these processes is to understand from your manager what you need to produce that, communicate what you're going to produce, right? Throughout every step of the process.
There is an art and a science to the way that we communicate with people and new leaders. And one of the pro tips that I always like to share with people is, as you're just getting to know this leader, go out of your way to ask them, how do you like to be communicated with for those three things that you're talking about, right? Do you have open office hours where you want to chat about that? Do you want me to save time during our one-on-one? Do you want an email? How do you like to be communicated with? And remember, ultimately, people like to be seen, heard, and understood. That's a really great way for you to stand out, because not a lot of other people would do that. So these are really good lessons, and I really appreciate you sharing them, because it's hard. It's hard to say my ego is driving the bus, and it's really good for that director of yours, whomever that person is, to come to you and to say, ouch, that was hard to see, and yeah, you've got some recovering to do here. And to know that you never quite recovered, but it's what you did after the fact, or you were paying attention to some of these signals to know that at some point it just wasn't good enough and you made changes.
Yeah. Sometimes you don't even realize your ego's driving the bus, right?
I find the majority of the time people don't realize that, and this is why it's really important in terms of the people that we surround ourselves with. That's a form of caring, when somebody actually takes you to the side and says, this is what I'm seeing. I'm not sure that this is your intention. And it's a little hard to watch, because it's going to come back and it's going to hurt you.
In sales, that's evidence of a really great leader. They're doing more than asking what your forecast is. They're developing new talent, And that's incredibly important to look for. I said earlier that mentorship makes a extraordinary amount of difference, right? I really believe that that so much of what we do in sales gets sort of passed down from one leader to another. And unfortunately, a lot of this is not written down, but you'll find that I'll validate this with Amy, but I think that the best folks have worked with really great leaders out there, and that's how they learned to be good.
I think it's a part of being a good leader is leading by example. And part of leading by example is not just the rah, 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 or the forecast review, or the things that I can see from running a dashboard view and seeing that for myself. There's a thing called context. Not all numbers are created equal, even though they look that way. And there's a thing called human nature. And how you crossed the finish line, Nathaniel, and how I crossed the finish line, we both did it, but how we did it is different. And that's okay. I don't have to be you. You don't have to be me. And the best leader is going to understand that. And that's also a thing about leadership, is to be able to have a hard conversation and to do it with kindness, but firmness, and being crystal clear on what the expectations are. And that's how I think you start that kind of those compounding generational effects from one leader down to the next, down to the next, down to the next, and so on and so forth. And that's called a legacy. So I'm just tickled that you're doing that in practice now as someone that is building something from scratch and building out things that will then have teams underneath those things that will then be led by you. And so,
well, fingers crossed.
well, if not, then we already made a deal where if not, then I'm coming for you and I will find you something that will. So that's a different story for a different day. For anybody listening, I really hope that this was as helpful as I am hearing it to be. And Nathaniel, I hope that this is what you thought it might be, of me peer pressuring you to come onto the podcast. I can't thank you enough. For anybody that does not know you, where do they get to see you, find you, learn more from you, talk to you, connect with you? What's the best way to do that, my friend?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Nathaniel Dean, and on Instagram at the same. So either of those pathways work well.
Thank you, Nathaniel Dean. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you, Amy.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. In the blink of an eye, the final episode is what you just listened to of Tales from the Field Season 1. And what an honor and what a privilege. And I can't tell you how grateful I am for so many wonderful gems to join me to have a real conversation that I hope has helped all of you get better, because that's what it's all about. Guess what, though? You're not done with me. I'm coming back for Season 2. And the fine folks over at Sales Feed and I are brainstorming all the different ways that we can continue to bring you content that's going to pack a punch to help you get better. This has been a Sales Feed production. If you're not familiar with all of the fun things that they have up their sleeve, check out salesfeedmedia.com.